Time for fresh blood, Damien announced to the entire marketing team, his expensive cologne wafting across the conference room as he clasped his hands together. Cora's stepping aside so we can take the brand to the next level. I sat there, hands folded neatly in my lap, watching faces turn toward me with expressions ranging from shock to pity. 12 years of building Blue Flame Kitchen Company from a struggling startup to a household name, and this 30-something marketing director with 3 weeks of tenure was announcing my professional funeral. My name is Cora Summers. At 57, I've spent my entire career in marketing, the last 12 years dedicated to transforming Blue Flame from a small kitchen appliance company in Napa into a nationwide phenomenon. I started when our logo was still a crude sketch on a napkin, and our budget couldn't even cover decent Facebook ads. Now our signature Blue Flame appeared on high-end kitchen appliances in millions of American homes. I'd like to introduce Jasmine Winters, Damien continued, gesturing toward a young woman I'd never seen before. She brings 4 million Instagram followers, her own successful skincare brand, and the fresh perspective we need to connect with younger consumers. Jasmine, who couldn't be more than 24, waved enthusiastically. Her perfectly manicured hands sparkled with rings that probably cost more than my monthly salary. I offered a polite smile and nodded graciously. No drama, no tears, just professional dignity, as I watched this social media influencer with zero corporate marketing experience prepare to inherit everything I'd built. Cora has done good work getting us to this point, Damien said with the condescending tone of someone praising a child for a mediocre drawing. But marketing has evolved, and we need someone who isn't out of touch. The word stung, but I maintained my composure. Out of touch? I had tripled our market share in the past 5 years alone. My traditional family values with modern efficiency campaign had connected with working mothers across America. The Flame of Inspiration slogan I created now appeared on every product we shipped. As the meeting wrapped up, colleagues approached with awkward condolences. I assured them I was fine, that change was inevitable in business. But inside, I felt a cold fury building. Not because I'd been replaced, but because of the casual disrespect of my contributions. What Damien didn't know, what no one in that room realized, was that I had seen this coming months ago. The warning signs were there, whispered conversations that stopped when I approached, the hiring of consultants to review marketing performance, Damien's arrival, and I had prepared accordingly. As I packed my office that afternoon, I smiled at the irony. They thought I was finished. They had no idea I was just getting started. I've never been naive about corporate politics. When you're a woman who started her career in the 80s, you learn to read between the lines. 6 months ago, when the board brought in management consultants who spent more time interviewing junior staff than senior leadership, I recognized the pattern. When they hired Damien 3 weeks ago, with his vague previous job titles and LinkedIn profile full of buzzwords like disruptive innovation and digital transformation pioneer, I knew my days were numbered. My husband Thomas noticed my concern before I even voiced it. "You're bringing work stress home again," he said one evening as I stared at my laptop, reviewing our latest campaign metrics. "I haven't seen you this tense since the product recall crisis 4 years ago." Thomas had been my rock throughout my career, supporting every late night and weekend emergency. As a professor of literature, he brought a different perspective to my challenges, always asking about the narrative, the underlying story behind corporate decisions. "The new marketing director introduced himself today," I explained. "He asked how we've managed without proper social media integration, and whether I was comfortable with digital analytics. I've been running cross-platform campaigns and analyzing customer engagement metrics since before he graduated college." "Sounds like he's building a case," Thomas observed. "What's your plan?" That was always his question. Never, "How are you feeling?" but "What's your plan?" It was his way of reminding me that I always had options. The next day I called Franklin Johnson, an attorney who had previously advised our company. After describing the situation, he recommended something that had never occurred to me. You created the Flame of Inspiration slogan and campaign framework before submitting it to the company, correct? He asked. Yes, I confirmed. I developed it at home over a long weekend. The company loved it and implemented it immediately. And there's no work for hire agreement or intellectual property assignment for creative work done outside the office? I checked my contract. There wasn't. Then you should copyright it under your personal name, Franklin advised. It won't stop them from pushing you out if that's their intention, but it gives you protection and leverage. Over the following weeks, I quietly filed copyright protections for the slogan, the campaign structure I'd developed, and several taglines and creative templates, all under my personal name. These were my creations, born from my experience and insight. If the company wanted to continue using them after showing me the door, they would need to acknowledge their value and mine. I didn't want revenge. I wanted respect. And sometimes in business, respect only comes when there's a document with your name on it. The realization that I was being systematically undermined came gradually, then suddenly, like bankruptcy, as Hemingway would say. Little things accumulated. My invitation to the quarterly strategy meeting was accidentally overlooked. My recommendations for the holiday campaign were still under review, while Damien fast-tracked his own ideas. Junior team members who used to seek my guidance now directed their questions to him, or avoided my office altogether. Then came the final confirmation. I overheard Damien speaking to our CFO in the break room. We need to skew younger with everything. Products, messaging, team members, he said, not noticing me in the hallway. Cora's demographic expertise is limited. Too focused on traditional families when we need to capture Gen Z before they develop brand loyalty elsewhere. She's been instrumental in building our brand recognition, the CFO replied. The board might have concerns about... Trust me, Damien interrupted. I've done this before. We'll keep her around through the transition, but within 6 months, we'll have a completely refreshed marketing approach. More authenticity, more digital engagement. She'll either adapt or... He made a dismissive gesture that finished his sentence more eloquently than words could have. I quietly stepped away, processing what I'd heard. It wasn't just about bringing in fresh blood. It was about erasing what I'd built and starting over. The irony was that our most successful demographic was women aged 35-55, not the younger audience Damien was so eager to pursue. Our market research showed they had the purchasing power and interest in high-quality kitchen appliances. But data wouldn't matter if Damien had already sold his vision to the board. That evening, I met with Franklin at his office downtown. Spring rain tapped against the windows as I laid out everything I'd observed. Classic case of ageism wrapped in business speak, he said, leaning back in his chair. Unfortunately common, especially in marketing. I've seen it dozens of times. I've copyrighted the creative elements as you suggested, I said. What's my next move? Wait, he advised. If they're planning to replace you, let them make the first move. Don't give them cause to claim insubordination or unprofessional behavior. And if they push me out but continue using my copyrighted materials? Franklin smiled. Then we have a very straightforward legal case, and they'll quickly discover the cost of underestimating you. I followed his advice, maintaining professionalism even as I was increasingly sidelined. I watched as Damien brought in consultants from his previous job, as he scheduled innovation workshops without including me, as he began referring to legacy marketing approaches when describing campaigns I had created. When the meeting finally came, that terrible gathering where he announced my departure as if it were a mutual decision and introduced my replacement, I was prepared. But preparation didn't make it less painful. 12 years of my life, my creativity, my passion reduced to good work that was now apparently obsolete. I left the office that day without fanfare, but with absolute clarity about what would come next. The 6 weeks after my departure from Blue Flame were filled with a strange mix of emotions. There was grief, the kind that comes from losing something you've poured your heart into. There was anger, too, bubbling beneath the surface whenever I thought about Damien's dismissive tone, or remembered watching Jasmine taking notes in what used to be my office. But mostly, there was anticipation. I knew what was coming. I spent my newfound free time reconnecting with industry contacts, updating my portfolio, and consulting with Franklin about precisely how events might unfold. Thomas encouraged me to take time for myself. "You've earned a break after 12 years. But relaxation felt impossible. I was waiting for the inevitable. It came on a Tuesday morning. Thomas called me into his home office where he was browsing the internet. "They've launched the new campaign," he said, turning his screen toward me. There it was, Blue Flame's bold new direction. The website had been redesigned with more white space and contemporary fonts, but the content was unmistakable. The Flame of Inspiration slogan remained front and center. The campaign structure, my 3-tiered approach highlighting quality, convenience, and community, was intact. They'd even kept my tagline, "Where culinary dreams ignite." The only significant change was the messenger. Jasmine's face appeared throughout the site, demonstrating products in expertly lit kitchen settings. A video showed her explaining how Blue Flame had revolutionized her cooking experience, though I doubted she'd known the brand existed 3 months ago. "They didn't even bother to rename anything," I said, my suspicions confirmed. "They just slapped a new face on my work." Thomas squeezed my shoulder. "Your move, then?" I nodded and called Franklin. The cease and desist letter went out that afternoon, delivered to Damien, the executive team, and the board of directors simultaneously. Franklin's language was precise and unemotional, laying out exactly which elements of the campaign were my copyrighted intellectual property and demanding immediate removal from all platforms. The response came within hours, not from our corporate legal team as I'd expected, but from Damien himself. His email bristled with indignation. "This is a transparent attempt at extortion," he wrote. "All materials were created as work for hire under your employment contract. The company will vigorously defend its intellectual property rights." Franklin forwarded me the message with a single comment. He didn't consult legal before responding. "This works in our favor." He was right. By the next morning, Blue Flame's actual attorneys had reached out requesting an urgent meeting. They weren't nearly as confident as Damien about the company's position. The Zoom call that followed was tense, but professional. I sat in Franklin's office as he calmly explained that the copyrighted elements were created outside of work hours, prior to submission to the company, without any specific work-for-hire agreement covering such activities. He presented the copyright certificates with their filing dates, all preceding my departure by several months. "Ms. Summers is open to licensing these materials," Franklin concluded, "but continuing to use them without agreement constitutes willful copyright infringement, with potential statutory damages of up to $150,000 per work infringed." The company's lead attorney, Eleanor, asked for time to confer with the executive team. Her expression told me everything. They hadn't expected this complexity. They'd assumed anything I created automatically belonged to Blue Flame. "Of course they did," Thomas said when I recounted the meeting that evening. "They thought they owned you. So naturally, they thought they owned your ideas too. I didn't want to destroy what I'd built. But I needed them to understand that discarding me didn't mean they could keep the best parts of my work without acknowledgement." The company had 24 hours to respond before we filed a formal infringement claim. As I waited, I wondered whether Damien had bothered to investigate what out of touch really meant. The following day passed without word from Blue Flame. Franklin advised patience, but by evening my nerves were frayed. I kept checking my phone, expecting a call that never came. Thomas suggested dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant to distract me, and I reluctantly agreed. We were halfway through our pasta when my phone finally rang. The screen displayed a name I hadn't expected: Vivian Harper, Blue Flame's board chair. "I need to take this," I told Thomas, stepping outside onto the restaurant's patio. "Cora," Vivian began, her normally confident voice sounding strained. "I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." "Not at all," I replied, watching through the window as Thomas ordered another glass of wine. "How are you, Vivian?" "Honestly, dealing with a situation that should never have happened. I've just come from an emergency board meeting regarding your copyright claim. My heart pounded as I waited for her to continue. The board was never informed about your departure, she said. Damien told us you had chosen to retire and were helping with the transition. When we received your cease and desist letter, well, it raised some significant questions. I absorbed this information silently. So Damien had lied not just to the team, but to the board as well. Our legal team has reviewed your claim, Vivian continued. They believe you have a strong position. The campaign has been pulled from all platforms while we determine next steps. I see, I said, maintaining my professional tone despite the surge of vindication I felt. Cora, you built this brand. Your marketing vision defined Blue Flame. The board recognizes that and values your contribution. She paused. We'd like to discuss options for moving forward that could benefit both parties. I'm listening, I said. We're proposing a licensing agreement for your copyrighted materials, with appropriate compensation. Additionally, we'd like to offer you a position as Chief Brand Officer, reporting directly to the board, not to Damien. The offer took me by surprise. Chief Brand Officer was a promotion, with greater authority than I'd previously held. What about Damien? I asked. His judgment is under review, Vivian said diplomatically. I could read between the lines. His days were numbered. And Jasmine? Her contract is being reassessed. The early metrics from her campaign launch were not what was promised. I gazed across the street, watching traffic pass as I considered the offer. 6 weeks ago, I would have accepted immediately, grateful for the recognition. Now, I wasn't so sure. I appreciate the offer, Vivian. I'll need time to consider it. Of course, she said, but please know that the board values your expertise. What happened was a serious misstep that doesn't reflect our appreciation for everything you've built. After we hung up, I returned to Thomas, who raised an eyebrow expectantly. They pulled the campaign, I explained, and offered me a promotion to Chief Brand Officer, reporting to the board. Congratulations, he said, raising his wine glass. Though I'm guessing from your expression that you're not accepting. He knew me too well. During my weeks away from Blue Flame, I'd received calls from several companies interested in my expertise. One in particular, KitchenCraft, a smaller but rapidly growing competitor, had made an intriguing offer. I'm meeting with KitchenCraft tomorrow, I said. Their CEO wants to discuss an executive position. Thomas nodded. A fresh start might be what you need. Somewhere your value won't be questioned. I took a sip of wine, contemplating the irony of the situation. Damien had pushed me out seeking fresh blood, only to find himself in a precarious position. Meanwhile, I potentially had multiple executive-level opportunities to choose from. Sometimes, being out of touch meant simply being beyond the reach of those who failed to appreciate your worth. The KitchenCraft headquarters occupied a renovated industrial building on the outskirts of Napa. Unlike Blue Flame's sterile corporate environment, their space featured exposed brick, warm lighting, and a fully functional test kitchen where new products were developed and showcased. Erica Donahue, KitchenCraft's CEO, greeted me in the lobby. At 62, she represented everything corporate America often overlooked: experience, wisdom, and the kind of strategic thinking that came from navigating business challenges across decades. Thanks for coming, Cora, she said, leading me through the office. I've admired your work at Blue Flame for years. Their loss is potentially our gain. The tour ended in their test kitchen, where Erica had arranged coffee and pastries. As we sat at the central island, she explained KitchenCraft's position in the market. Smaller than Blue Flame, but growing steadily, focused on quality craftsmanship and sustainability, rather than mass production. We're at a turning point, Erica explained. Our products have loyal customers, but we need stronger brand recognition to compete nationally. That's where you come in. She outlined her vision. a new role as Executive Vice President of Brand Strategy, with full creative control and a seat on their executive committee. The salary was comparable to what Blue Flame had paid me, with additional equity options. Most importantly, all creative work would be contractually protected, with clear ownership delineated between company property and my intellectual contributions. "We value experience here," Erica said. "Half our executive team is over 50. We found that institutional knowledge and proven judgment outperform trendiness every time." As I drove home, I weighed the options. Blue Flame's offer represented vindication, a public acknowledgement that pushing me aside had been a mistake. Kitchencraft offered a fresh start with a company whose values seemed more aligned with mine. Both were flattering. Both had advantages. When I walked through our front door, Thomas was waiting with news of his own. "Franklin called," he said. "Apparently there's been another development at Blue Flame." I called Franklin immediately, putting him on speakerphone. "The plot thickens," he said. "I received a call from their legal department. Damien has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation." "What kind of investigation?" I asked. "They're examining communications between Damien and Jasmine prior to your departure. It seems they may have had a personal relationship that wasn't disclosed when he pushed for her hiring." I shook my head, thinking of how Damien had preached about authenticity while potentially orchestrating my replacement for personal rather than professional reasons. "There's more," Franklin continued. "Vivian Harper asked if you'd be willing to meet with the board directly before making your decision about their offer." "When?" "Tomorrow morning. I get the impression they're quite eager." After hanging up, I turned to Thomas, who had been listening silently. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking I need to hear what the board has to say," I replied. "But I'm also thinking Kitchencraft might be the right move regardless." Thomas nodded. "Either way, you're negotiating from strength now. That's quite a turnaround from 6 weeks ago." He was right. 6 weeks ago, I'd been packing my office, dismissed as irrelevant by a man half my age. Now I had multiple executive opportunities, and the satisfaction of knowing my strategic foresight had paid off. The next morning, I dressed carefully for my meeting with Blue Flame's board, a navy blue suit that projected confidence without appearing unapproachable. As I fastened my grandmother's pearl earrings, I thought about how this day might unfold. Whatever happened in that boardroom, one thing was certain. I would never again allow anyone to underestimate the value of my experience. Age wasn't a liability. It was my greatest asset. And after today, everyone involved would understand that. The Blue Flame boardroom felt smaller than I remembered. 10 people sat around the polished table, with Vivian at the head. Damien's seat was conspicuously empty. I recognized most of the faces, people I'd worked with for years, who had apparently been unaware of how I'd been pushed aside until legal issues forced it into the open. "Thank you for meeting with us, Cora," Vivian began. "We wanted to speak with you directly, without intermediaries." I nodded, maintaining a professional composure despite the tension in the room. "I'll be direct," she continued. "Damien misrepresented several situations to this board. He claimed you had chosen to retire. He portrayed the Jasmine Winters hire as a strategic partnership rather than a replacement. And he assured us that all marketing materials were unquestionably company property." One of the other board members, Harold, leaned forward. "The campaign has been completely pulled. Our social media accounts are dormant. The influencer contract is suspended. And our Q2 product launch is now without marketing support. Frankly, we're in a difficult position." "I understand," I said simply. "We're prepared to offer you the chief brand officer position with a significant compensation increase," Vivian said. "Additionally, we'll purchase your copyrighted materials outright at market value, with full attribution in all future uses." I took a moment before responding. "I appreciate the offer. It's very generous. But?" Vivian could clearly sense my hesitation. "But I've accepted an executive position with Kitchencraft," I said. The contract was signed yesterday afternoon. The room fell silent. Several board members exchanged glances. I see, Vivian finally said. That's unfortunate for us, though I understand your decision. However, I added, I'm open to licensing my copyrighted materials to Blue Flame under specific conditions. I have no desire to damage the brand I spent 12 years building. What conditions? Harold asked. I outlined my terms. A 3-year licensing agreement at fair market value, with my name credited in all uses of the materials, and one more stipulation that caused visible surprise around the table. I want the company to establish a mentorship program for marketing professionals over 45, I said, with dedicated resources for mid-career development. 3 months later, I stood in Kitchencraft's conference room, reviewing our new brand strategy with the marketing team. My office wall featured framed copies of marketing trade publications with headlines like Kitchencraft's Strategic Coup and Blue Flame's Brand Crisis, a lesson in respecting institutional knowledge. The transition had been smoother than I anticipated. Erica's team welcomed my expertise, and without the need to fight for recognition, I found myself more creative and energized than I'd been in years. Meanwhile, the developments at Blue Flame had played out publicly and painfully. Damien had been terminated after the investigation revealed he'd been dating Jasmine for months before hiring her. A clear conflict of interest he'd hidden from HR and the board. Jasmine's contract had been terminated as well, with her final Instagram post about the situation causing additional PR headaches for the company. The mentorship program I'd required as part of my licensing agreement had launched with significant industry attention. Several marketing professionals over 50 had been hired specifically for their experience in traditional media integration, something Blue Flame had nearly abandoned in their rush to appear cutting edge. Most satisfyingly, the board had restructured their marketing department entirely, implementing new policies that emphasized balanced teams with mixed generational perspectives. Your strategy is working beautifully, Erica commented after reviewing our latest market share numbers. We've gained 3 percentage points against Blue Flame in just 1 quarter. We're just getting started, I replied. Wait until our holiday campaign launches. That evening, Thomas and I celebrated our wedding anniversary at home, raising glasses to new beginnings. To being out of touch, he toasted with a smile. May we always be beyond the reach of those who don't recognize true value, I responded, clinking my glass against his. Experience may be impossible to counterfeit, but its worth is undeniable to those wise enough to recognize it. I smiled at the thought that being pushed aside had actually led me to where I truly belonged, a company that valued wisdom as much as innovation, where my years of experience weren't just tolerated but celebrated. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, but about finally finding your rightful place.